So my name is Paul Foley. I'm the Sales Director of Catax Group. I guess that does what it says on the tin. Director of Sales and all things really in terms of the go-to-market planning for the organisation. So in terms of, I guess, the day-to-day, it's morphed over the years. So 9 years ago when I joined the organisation, it was very much running the team. It was out doing the business on the road for probably 5 years, meeting clients. Continue to do that today, of course, but now more involved on the board, really establishing new channels to market and really determining part of the strategy in terms of year on year. So right now, for example, just planning for the 22-23 year. So Catax is quite a unique player in terms of what we do in the UK. So we essentially get money back as tax relief, predominantly around research and development tax, but there are some other tax breaks, all above the line in terms of these aren't tax schemes, this is legislation, this is essentially monies which you as an organisation or entrepreneur are allowed back if you're investing in certain ways. So there's things like capital allowances, which essentially are tax breaks in commercial property, anything from hotels to dental practice to office space. And research and development tax is probably 85% of what we do. We're the largest UK player as we speak, and essentially it takes about 16 weeks from contract to cash in order to recover some of the monies which are due back to that organisation. So Catax has been about 13 years now, originally started in Manchester. We opened in London about 9 years ago, and we opened in Canada 2 years ago, all being very successful. We've grown now to 125 people in the business, end to end, and we're probably the largest UK player in doing what we do, and we're quite proud really in holding some exclusive relationships across the UK, which allows us to essentially be that go-to player for that information and insight as a sort of trusted advisor for what you'd need to know around tax relief. And Catax as a body really is about making sure that the SME market particularly is enjoying all of the legislation and tax breaks which are available to it. So it's really the leading edge of growth funding, predominantly with something called research and development tax credits. We're 125 people. We have serviced over 15,000 clients now in that timeline and recovered near on £400 million of actual cash back. So quite a successful journey, but a real fun journey because we're dealing with, I guess, funky entrepreneurs every day of the week. So R&D started in the UK probably about 20 years ago now, and there are half a dozen, probably what I would call pure play players. So those that actually, this is what they do every day, including ourselves at Catax. And then there may be something like an additional 90 now. So it's quite a busy market, quite a mature market in those that will also add R&D advice to their portfolio. In terms of where we stand proud, I guess, is we've taken quite a different approach to the marketplace. If you look at some of our competitors that actually started before us, they've really started to talk about tax. And in terms of tax, it's quite a dry subject to the entrepreneur that will always lead them talking to their accountant. And if their accountant isn't well versed on the topic of this particular legislation, it's something that doesn't happen. That's essentially why we've got a business. On the other side of the fence, you could be talking about science and technology, which again can be quite complex and can be something which the typical entrepreneur doesn't recognize they may well be doing in their business environment. You know, they don't think they have white coats and laboratories. So again, it can get missed. We really changed how we approach that market. We changed the conversation and we talked to the entrepreneur and the business owner really along the way he or she would I guess, prefer to have a chat about business and about their particular business. And we'll ask some questions which are very relevant to what they're doing. And it's our role to try and tease out where actually the tax opportunity of tax relief or the science technology is fitting in terms of R&D. So really, I guess it's the approach we've taken to the initial engagement of that entrepreneur, coupled with then how we deliver it. Again, there's a perception in the market. You go through this process because in UK tax law, you can go back 2 years and essentially recover taxes for investments you've made which are qualifying for R&D activities. And if you don't know about that, then you may well have missed it out, of course. So it's our role really to try and drill down and find out where that is. Now, I sometimes can't remember what I was doing last week, so try and remember what you're doing 2 years ago. That can be a little bit tough. What we have developed is a very slick process, dare I say, which really, again, is quite different to our competitors, which is a very modest amount of investment from the client side. Actually, it's typically about half a day. Yeah, so in terms of the engagement, really, we're very conscious that the typical type of profile of client that we're dealing with is going to be pretty busy, looking forward, growing their business. So by default, they're time poor. They're probably not well understanding of the opportunities that have been made available to them under this piece of legislation. A lot of the business that we do is essentially virgin territory. They haven't been there before. So our first piece is really to try and articulate well the art of the possible. What is it that they are doing that may well fit to the legislation? And that can be done in a very short period of time, really in a sort of Q&A type approach at the very start of the process. So first of all, we know we're not going to be wasting time. And if there's nothing to be taken on board at that particular moment and progress with, then we'll tell the client that. The worst case, they've now learned a little bit about exactly how the legislation works and maybe how they can plan for it in the future. If there is something to do, we take instruction. And what that really means is we then start going through that process. And essentially we have a technical account manager becomes engaged, which is more around case management. We have what we call a specialist tax consultant, and we have a tax technician. So essentially we wrap a team around that individual, all based on a no-win, no-fee. So although that's commercially interesting to the client, what it really means is we're not going to invest that level of resource unless we're very confident that actually the process itself is going to result in an opportunity which is worthwhile. And the average claim in terms of cash terms back to client at this moment in time is running around £60,000. It differs, but of course you then work down to how many hours you're going to sink in order to get that £60,000 back, and of course have the information and insight to plan for the future. The whole process itself takes about 4 hours, so we try and keep it light touch on the client side. It's really a sort of an interview process between both internal stakeholders and something that we call the competent professional, which is probably one of the leading technical people that may well have been working with either outside the company or inside the company in terms of leading that project or work stream. So we try and make sure it's a very non-intrusive approach. In addition to that then, because we're 15,000 clients in, we've got a lot of intelligence in our data set, so we can understand really various stakeholders, various costs that may well have been sunk. So we'll try and make sure that we are searching for those, drilling down for those, and when we gather them all in what we term as the narrative before submissions to HMRC, we try and make sure that we do two things really. One, we're not claiming a pound that isn't appropriate, but also we're not missing a pound that should be claimed for. So a typical client, there are this is a piece of legislation that stretches across the UK. It's divided into two styles of legislation. There is essentially the small company, the SME scheme, which is sub 500 employees, and there is something called RDEC, which is for large company organisations. So everyone can qualify from the investment, and think of R&D more about the government underwriting some of the risks that you as an entrepreneur may well be taking. So there has to be some qualifying criteria. Essentially, it's something that you can't necessarily Google and just find it's available to you a week on Friday and bring in. But it's something that you're going to invest in, and you're going to probably take some risks about it may not work. So actually failure for the first time in this piece of legislation can be something which, not necessarily good news, but it's not as bad as you think, because failure means that actually it can't be achieved readily in the marketplace and you're trying to break some ground in terms of what you're doing. So typical client tends to be, if you can imagine that then, where people are trying to push the boundaries, is growth. So it's very horizontal in terms of sector. There's the very large end, and we deal with some blue chip names, household names, and we have the other end of the spectrum, which are almost startup or early stage companies. And then there's the main cohort in the centre, which makes up most of the business, which is probably a 3, 4, 5 million turnover business, 20, 30 people, possibly family organisation, punching above its weight, actually running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, so really hasn't had time to stop, pause and see what tax breaks, innovation, growth support there may well be. That's where we come in. That's where we can start to make a little bit of a difference, and that would be a typical client to Catax today. So in terms of the short term, we've been, grown organically in predominantly the first 13 years. We've made a couple of acquisitions in recent times. We'll continue to do that over the coming 6 months, 9 months of next year. We're a £20 million business as we stand today in terms of fees. And we'll continue to really get involved with various sectors and geographies that maybe we don't have as many of today. And I guess where downtown is going is exactly where we are, or where our route is as well. So we're heavily invested in Birmingham right now, a lot of good activity around the Midlands. Shrewsbury and Wales particularly, we've got a lot of activity, and our London office really is doing good things. And again, I know that downtown has got some ambitions to grow the London footprint, and I think in the northeast. So not an area that we're particularly active, if I'm brutally honest right now, but again, that is an area that hopefully the relationship and collaboration with downtown and its members can start to yield more returns in the northeast of the UK. So, well, by all means, just take a look at the website, catax.com in the first instance. There's a few explainer videos, which will probably just give a little bit more meat on the bones in terms of what R&D is about, what capital allowances are, and how you can benefit from those. By all means, contact me directly, contact through the website, whichever medium is your preferred route. I think we've got my details here in terms of email. Give me a shout by all means, that's fine. So I got involved with downtown because the secret of success for us from the very beginning really is we work with third parties. We are a channel play organisation, and we've worked really with the movers and shakers, whether they are players in terms of influencing bodies and accredited bodies at the top end of accountancy and the like, or whether they're very parochial in terms of working very locally in a particular town. Downtown is perfect for us in terms of both where the ambition of downtown is, where the history lies, and where the footprint is today. And more importantly, I guess the profile of the membership is exactly the type of client that we want to be engaged with, sharing with, and learning from, because actually it's a two-way street, and the whole idea of a very active and energized network to me is not only to be able to position what Catax is doing, but actually sometimes the sort of one-on-one makes three. If you can find actually some effective partnerships within the downtown community that can actually take your message out in a slightly different way, which is more effective for both parties. So Catax has been about 13 years now, originally started in Manchester, opened in London about 9 years ago. And Catax as a body really is about making sure that the SME market particularly is enjoying all of the legislation and tax breaks which are available to it. So it's really the leading edge of growth funding, predominantly with something called research and development tax credits. We're 125 people. We have serviced over 15,000 clients now in that timeline, and recovered near on £400 million of actual cash back. So quite a successful journey, but a real fun journey because we're dealing with, I guess, funky entrepreneurs every day of the week.
If you enjoyed that video, then please subscribe to our YouTube channel on the link below and be among the first to get to listen to all the latest interviews through the Downtown Den.